Good evening, and welcome to our second Michigan Department of Natural Resources live event. Tonight's 1-hour online forum focus will be fish. Spring is a popular time for Michigan's over 1.3 million registered anglers, with multiple fishing seasons having just opened this past Saturday. Our great state has the largest portfolio of freshwater fisheries in the world, including 4 Great Lakes, 11,000 inland lakes, and 36,000 miles of rivers and streams. Tonight, our panel of DNR experts is here to answer your questions about Michigan's fisheries, fishing season, regulations, and more. Please join me in welcoming tonight's guests. Nick Popoff, fisheries biologist and regulatory affairs specialist. Nick is the manager of the DNR Fisheries Division, Aquatic Species and Regulatory Affairs and Tribal Coordination Units. Jay Wesley, fisheries biologist and Southern Lake Michigan Management Unit Supervisor. Jay is the manager of the Southern Lake Michigan Management Unit and works out of Plainwell. Dean Molnar, Assistant Chief, DNR Law Enforcement Division. Dean is the Assistant Chief of the DNR's Law Enforcement Division. He has served as a conservation officer assigned to Clinton County, sergeant in the division's training section, and area law supervisor for several northern Michigan counties. In 2001, he was promoted to the rank of lieutenant and then acting staff captain in 2008. He began his current role in 2009. Thank you, Nick, Jay, and Dean, for being with us tonight. We've been collecting questions from you, the public, since last week, and we'll try to get through as many as we can in the hour we have allotted. We will also take questions live via Facebook, Twitter, and email as time allows. You can follow the conversation by following @MichiganDNR on Twitter and with the hashtag DNRLive. With that, let's get started. Question number 1. We're hearing a lot about the proposed changes to the fishing licenses in Michigan. What do we have currently versus what is proposed?
Okay, so currently we have 17 different licenses. They range from about $2 to $42. They range from 24 hours to all year long. And they're broken down by age, resident, non-resident, and different species. What we're proposing is to reduce 17 to 4 licenses that would be available. There would be a 24-hour that would be good for resident and non-resident, and that would increase in cost to $10 from $7. We're proposing a decrease in cost for the all-species senior license. We're proposing an increase for the non-residents all-species license to $75, and we're proposing to decrease the resident all-species fishing license to $25. We're also going to add a 3-day restricted, non-restricted $30 license for any angler. So if you can go to online too to read more information about that.
Okay, question number 2. If the proposed license package passes, what will the DNR do with the money it earns from license sales to help Michigan fisheries?
Well, what we'd like to do is get a lot more boots on the ground. We want to hire more creel census clerks, more biologists, more technicians, and these folks will go out and assess our fisheries as well as our anglers. We want to do more habitat improvement projects. We know that to keep our native fish species, our populations healthy, we need good habitat. So we're planning on doing more habitat projects with groups like Trout Unlimited. We're hoping to get a new fund, or at least reinstate the Inland Fisheries Grant, where we can offer grant opportunities to local units of government as well as organizations to do more habitat work. And our hatchery systems, we hope to do some improvements where we can raise more steelhead and hopefully get a cool water rearing facility where we can raise more walleye, northern pike, muskie, and do more work with species like lake sturgeon.
We also have a strategic planning document too that helps guide us in those goals. So.
And in the back of that plan, there's a whole list of other projects and work that we could accomplish with a license increase.
And with that too, for law enforcement division, we're looking at, right now we have 173 sworn officers in the division. We only have 123 field conservation officers. So our plan would be, our part that would we receive, would we put more boots on the ground, as Jay said, because right now we have 3 counties that we don't have an officer assigned to. So our plan would be ultimately is put more people, more conservation officers for our division on the ground.
Our third question, does the DNR's fishery division only work with fish? What about other species that live in or near water?
Yeah, the fisheries division works with other species such as amphibians and reptiles, frogs, toads, salamanders, turtles. We do have special regulations and management, seasons, size limits, etc. And actually we have a biologist who travels to other states to present our regulations. So we're viewed as a very conservative state on that end and doing good things for our other water species such as amphibians and reptiles.
And I'll also add, even though we don't have regulations or major management programs, we're also interested in macroinvertebrates like aquatic insects and things like that, zooplankton, plant species as well. So it's all part of the aquatic community.
What should I do if I see a fellow angler breaking a fishing law?
Well, that's a great question, because with the amount of officers that we have in the state, really the anglers, our hunters and anglers, are our eyes and ears out there in the field for us. What we would like you to do is we'd like you to take, if you see somebody you think is or you know is breaking the law, to contact our 1-800-292-7800. That's our Report All Poaching hotline. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, year-round, 365 days a year. You can be, again, the eyes and ears. We'd like you to gather information. Write down the vehicle type, the description of what they're doing, location, time. And in today's technology, almost everybody has a smartphone on them that they're going to be able to, take some pictures. About a year and a half ago, we made a great sturgeon case because over on the west side of the state, because some folks saw, somebody illegally take a sturgeon. They took a bunch of videos of it and still pictures of it. They sent that to us, and with a matter of a very short period of time, we were able to apprehend that individual. Right now in our wrap line, we take approximately 6,500, 7,000 calls a year through that. And roughly right now, last year, there was about 10% of that was for fishing-related activity. That's in conjunction with what the officers also receive directly from their home or from their own central dispatches or from their own sources. So be our eyes and ears, but we ask you never, ever take any enforcement action upon yourself. That's what we're here for. You be our eyes and ears, and we'll take it from there.
This next question comes in from email. What native species restoration plans are in place for many locations where Great Lakes muskellunge historically existed but no longer do?
Yeah, Fisheries Division just a couple of years ago finished a muskie management plan for the state of Michigan that went out for public review and is now finished. And in that plan, one major thing we're doing is switching our muskie strain from the northern muskie strain to the Great Lakes strain. And this strain is coming right out of Michigan waters, out of the Detroit River and Lake St. Clair. And we'll be collecting those eggs probably, in June. Yeah. And those eggs are taken to Wolf Lake State Fish Hatchery, where we raise them to fall fingerlings. And last year we had a real successful year, and we were able to raise 28,000 fall fingerlings for stocking throughout the state. And they went to 8 different lakes throughout the state, and we were also able to stock drowned rivermouth lakes, as well as some rivers that connect to the Great Lakes. Also part of that plan is just trying to protect and manage the habitat for the Great Lakes muskies. So we're interested in protecting all the, especially Great Lakes coastal marshes where these fish specifically spawn. So.
Yeah, and we just have a new state record of 58-pound muskellunges, Great Lakes strain, and it's being recognized as the modern day world record. So pretty exciting.
And where was that caught?
Lake Bel Air, up in Antrim County.
And this question came in from Paul. What is the DNR doing to maintain Michigan's native sport fishery?
We do a lot on that end, particularly where I work in the field in a management unit. Most of our crew spends all summer long, fall and until we get ice on the lakes and rivers, going out and assessing populations. So they set nets in lakes, do stream shocking, boom shocking, and we get all this information about our fish populations. And from that data, we can do different things to help manage the fishery. It might be some sort of habitat improvement project or protection efforts, stocking of a species that might be missing. Typically our lakes and water bodies might be lacking a predator, so we might stock a walleye, a northern pike, or a muskie to help out with the population balance. And we also might recommend some regulation changes for a particular water body that might have a lot of small fish, where we can increase the bag limit on those fish, or perhaps the fish population is really low and we want to limit the harvest of the fish. So.
Yeah, and the Great Lakes are multi-jurisdictional, and so we work with other agencies such as the states and the tribes and the federal government on managing lake trout and whitefish and other important sport fisheries in the Great Lakes.
This next question is, I found a walleye with a tag on its jaw. What does that mean? And what should I do with the fish?
Well, typically it means we're going to be evaluating that population. So it could be we're looking at exploitation of the fishery, we're looking at growth, we're looking at movement, abundances, and we use several different types of tags. It could be a Floyd tag, a jaw tag that would be a metal ring around the jaw, an anchor tag, which is similar to a Floyd. Sometimes we'll put radio transmitters in fish too that put out a signal, and you may see a researcher out there with an antenna looking for those fish. And if you do contact a fish with the tag in it, usually there'll be some markings on it that say who to contact. It'll have a number. Sometimes they have rewards associated with them, and it's really important information for us to help us better understand the fisheries and to help all you anglers fish better.
And for example, we did a lot of tagging on the Muskegon River with walleye, and with angler reported tags, we found that they were moving out into Lake Michigan, and we're finding fish down as far as the St. Joe River and up near Charlevoix. So it was the first that we really realized that these walleye from one river system were moving so much throughout the Great Lakes.
Now we have a question about minnows. If I catch minnows in one lake, can I take them and use them as bait in another lake down the road?
Typically, yes. We do have some regulations on the use of minnows in Michigan, and that's came out recently because of information on diseases and how diseases are spread. And in particular, we got a disease called VHS virus. And now we limit the use of minnows to certain zones. So the state of Michigan's set up as in 3 zones: a VHS free zone, a VHS surveillance zone, and a VHS positive zone. And basically what we don't want you to do is to take fish from a positive area and take it up into the free zone. And the free zone's mainly the Upper Peninsula and Lake Superior area. And the whole point of this is we just don't want to be spreading diseases around the state, or have you mistakenly get a invasive species with your minnows and spread those throughout the state. So what I usually tell people is keep it close to home, and if you can, stay right within the same watershed that you're at, and then you won't you'll reduce the risk of spreading disease and invasive species.
And one of the other things too we tell folks is that if you're, at the end of the day and you still got minnows left over, don't dump them into the lake, because again, we just, anything we can do to help prevent any spread is what we're trying to accomplish here.
All right. Eric from Port Huron submitted this next question. Can gobies be used for bait as long as they aren't transported to another area? Did I get the pronunciation on that one wrong? Gobies.
Gobies.
Sorry about that. Can gobies be used for bait as long as they aren't being transported to another area?
So round gobies are an invasive species, and those of you who are on the Great Lakes will see them prevalent, but They aren't everywhere. So currently round gobies are on the restricted species list. We do not allow their possession live. So the only way you can possess a goby is if it's dead. And we do not allow their transport live. So you can use them as bait as long as they're dead. And it's really important because for aquatic invasive species, we focus on prevention first and foremost. So those lakes maybe inland that don't have gobies, we want to prevent gobies from getting in there. And then, detect them and respond to them. So they must be dead. You may not use them live.
And I know we get that question a lot from anglers because they seem to catch so many gobies in the Great Lakes. But like Nick said, right now we're in prevention mode, but God forbid if these gobies got into our inland lakes and were spread all over, then we'd probably change the regulations and encourage people to take them. But right now we don't, like Nick said, we don't have them in our inland lakes, so we really don't want them transferred from the Great Lakes to inland waters.
Yeah, and they are a great food source for bass. I mean, those lakes that do have gobies are the bass and lake trout and other fish are utilizing gobies as a food source. So I can understand the question. We can understand the question.
Well, good. Even our moderator is learning something tonight. So our next question. With all of the rain we've recently had throughout the state, and as a result, the flooding, will that help or hurt our lakes, rivers, and streams, and subsequently the fish that live in them?
Great question. It's going to do probably both help and hurt. One area that it specifically has helped already is in the Great Lakes. We've heard about the low water levels in Lake Michigan and Huron, and we had an instant increase of 3 inches already in April because of the amount of precipitation we've had. So that's been good news. A lot of our inland lakes were also very low, so we're getting back up to more natural levels. When water levels do go up into lakes, it provides access to new habitats. Fish can get into shallow water habitats, marsh areas further back where they weren't able to get before, so it can help those fish populations. With increased rain, we also get increased runoff, and that can bring a lot of nasty stuff to lakes too. So we may get more pollutants getting into lakes because of the runoff, and especially nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen, which can be good because it does provide nutrients for algae, but too much of a good thing, you can have algae blooms that can get really nasty too. So it's good and bad in lakes. Same with streams. Rivers need to flood to kind of maintain their channel dimensions, their width, their depth, and their sinuosity. So floods are good for that. It also helps spread sediments and stuff out onto the floodplain, which is good. But if you're a fish that just spawned just prior to all the flooding we had, your egg survival probably wasn't real good. So we may have some year class failure of some species because of the flooding.
Okay. Another publicly submitted question here. Why is there a possession limit on panfish, particularly at lakes where there is an overpopulation?
Well, panfish, there's a regulation, first of all, because they're a valued species. We definitely look at bluegills as a valued species, so we regulate them. There are areas where there are overpopulation abundances of smaller fish, and mainly because a lot of people don't want to take home those small fish. So we'll find more of those fish there. The way we'll manage those is through predator control, and we may have largemouth bass regulations that help manage those fish, and other regulations to help manage those fish. Jay may have some.
Yeah, the DNR did a lot of work on this in the 1990s, and Jim Schneider and Roger Lockwood wrote a really good research paper on it, and it's on our fish division library if you want to look it up. But it looked at all kinds of ways to address stunted bluegill populations, and one of the best ways, like Nick said, is through predator introduction. So we look to use walleye specifically for that. We've had good success with large catfish in controlling bluegills. And the study also found that people just don't like bluegills, want to take home bluegills that are less than 6 inches. So even if we allowed people to take as many as they wanted, they're looking for the 6-inch and larger bluegill anyway. And I don't know if Nick mentioned this, in our regulations, we combine a bunch of different panfish species. So it includes bluegills, pumpkin seed, rock bass, and black crappie and white crappie. So we would have to create a whole new regulation for just bluegills if we did go that route.
You know, one of the things that we're seeing too is that, especially during the ice fishing season, is that folks will catch those small ones and they want to feel like they're helping with the management of the fisheries, and they'll throw them on the ice. You know, I want to caution you that whether it's on the ice or if you're killing the small ones or throwing them back, that's going to be part of your bag limit. You know, it's, you know, you have a certain number of fish that you can keep, and if you've got small dead fish around you on the ice, that's going to be part of your bag limit. So we want to make sure that, you know, if you're not going to take these fish home, if they're too small for you, be sure you put them back in the water.
All right, this next question comes from Todd. Is it true chumming for steelhead and trout with eggs is now legal on the Muskegon River and other tributaries?
Yeah, we've been getting a lot of questions about this recently. Chumming in Michigan has always been legal. People use a lot of different methods to chum. One I'm more familiar with, fishing for carp. You throw a bunch of corn in the river to attract carp. But steelhead fishermen do also use salmon eggs for this. And it became illegal for a year or two due to the VHS virus that came in. We weren't sure if the virus was going to be spread through eggs or not. So we made it illegal to basically chum with eggs. You had to fish with your eggs attached to a hook. You just couldn't throw loose eggs into the river. Now that we have more information about how VHS is spread, that rule was changed. So you can use loose eggs in the river as chum. We just want you to be sure that wherever you got the eggs, that you're not taking eggs from a VHS positive or surveillance zone into a VHS free zone. So it is legal. So.
One of the things that we run into, and I know this question came in recently, was that if I catch a hen salmon, you know, can I milk her or take the eggs out of her and put her back in the water? And that's no, you can't do that. So if you're going to harvest that fish, then that fish is yours. You can't just take the eggs out and put it back in the water.
That's great.
All right, this next one says, I'm hearing a lot about these hooks called Alabama rigs. Am I allowed to use them? What hooks or rigs can I not use here in Michigan?
Well, basically, we're looking at in Michigan, you're allowed up to 3 lines with a total of 6 hooks in any combination. These Alabama rigs, or umbrella rigs as they're called also, basically if you look at an umbrella and it's got, you know, the structure of an umbrella and there's a hook attached to each one of those, usually there's 5, pretty much one of the ones I've seen, now that would count as 5 hooks on one line. So yes, they are legal, and they're becoming a little more popular. We're starting to see more in the last couple of years. So that would be an example of one that is legal to use. One of the, I think probably the most common illegal rig that we see is during the salmon season. That's a treble hook tied directly into the line. Okay, that would be an example of something that's illegal. But as long as you keep yourself to no more than 3 lines or no more than 6 hooks in total, you're good to go.
Yeah, there's some other regulations too to inhibit snagging, such as the single
Correct.
hook
Yep.
and different rigs that are illegal. So.
All right, this next one's from Steve. Why aren't Michigan's fishing regulations more visible, particularly at public access sites and waterways?
Well, that's a question that comes up quite, not quite real often, but it's something it's a good question to explain because we have to look at it. Michigan is a very unique state. Our resources are bountiful, and we've got over 11,000 lakes in the state, over 36,000 miles of stream, and just tremendous amount of public access. For us to be able to post it at public access sites or along the streams, honestly, that just will not work. That's why we have, our fishing guide, that we have all our rules and regulations in. You can contact any of our offices to get information. because part of it is that when it gets down to it's the responsibility of each angler to know what the rules, regulations are, what they can and what they cannot do. And if they were relying on having a sign to tell them, like on the road, of what the speed limit is, we wouldn't be able to keep all of our lake streams and access sites posted. And that would come into a problem when we go into court. If it's our responsibility to post it, then if it's not posted, then we're going to have issues with that. So we've got a great guide. In fact, the guide's condensed this year. Fisheries Division did a wonderful job in putting it together. It's got a lot of great information in it. It's more compact, easily to fit in your back pocket or your tackle box. So this is where you need to go to get your information.
Yeah, and the other thing we're working on too is not everyone, but a lot of people have smartphones now, and we're working on apps that can tell you right where you are in a water body, that says what the regulations are and what we're stocking there, what fisheries could be there. So those are all in the works, and I think would be very helpful for this type of question, is to knowing what's going on in your area. So
it's a fantastic idea. Okay, this next one is from Brandon. Why has the size limit for brook trout dropped from 8 inches to 7 inches in recent years in the lower peninsula?
I think Brandon is looking at our type 1 trout regulations. There's 4 types of regulations. Type 1 is the most used. It's the general trout regulation. A few years ago, we had brook trout minimum size limits of 7 in the Upper Peninsula and 8 in the UP. We've done a lot of work with brook trout, and we've recognized that they have a high mortality rate. We also recognize that when there's a difference between the Upper Peninsula and the Lower Peninsula, it causes some confusion. So we changed the Type 1 reg to a 7-inch minimum for all brook trout throughout the state, to make it the same across the state, and also to recognize that they are a high mortality fish, and you can't catch a lot of brook trout over 7 inches anyway.
Okay. Our next question actually came to us from Ohio. Paul says, what is the condition of the perch fisheries in the Thumb area?
Perch fishing in the Thumb area is getting better. It's not as good as it used to be historically, and throughout the Great Lakes, it's not as good as it was historically. We've been, as you've probably heard, bombarded by invasive species through the years, over 180, in fact, since the Great Lakes became connected to the rest of the world. And that's really taken its toll on our native fish species, especially yellow perch. But in the Thumb area, which is part of Lake Huron, we've seen some invasive species actually decline, and one in particular is the alewife. And with the decline in alewife, it might have led to some of the increases in year classes of yellow perch. And the size of the yellow perch seem to be growing pretty well. So we're seeing some positive signs there. In other Great Lakes, like Lake Michigan, we still have fairly low populations of yellow perch, but they are starting to get better. So.
I think a lot of people too, remember the 70s when there was just enormous catches of perch, and the water quality was much different then, and it's probably due to the invasive quagga and zebra mussels won't be that same water quality again in terms of nutrients in the water to benefit perch. So while we are seeing an uptick recently in Lake Huron, it probably won't ever get to those levels like they were in the 70s.
Yeah. Back then, our piers used to just be loaded with anglers, and that's mainly what they would catch is perch. But with the water clarity as it is now, you can see up to 70 feet down. That's pushed a lot of the perch offshore, and with all the invasive species near shore, like round gobies and zebra mussels, those perch have really moved offshore as well. So it's really changed.
All right, and this one's from Lyle in Portage. How do I find information about lakes and rivers in Southwest Michigan that have great populations of walleye?
Yeah, great question. Unfortunately, Southwest Michigan isn't blessed with the same water that we have in Northern Michigan and the UP, which typically have our more native walleye fisheries. But we do have some managed fisheries, and you can find that information. Most of our fisheries in Southwest Michigan are going to be stocked fisheries. So you can get on our website and go under the fisheries webpage and go to fish stocking, and you can look up by county where we stock fish in Southwest Michigan. Our unit also produces what's called a Better Fishing Waters, and that not only lists walleye, but all the other sport fish in our area and lakes where you can find them. So if you're interested in bass fishing, perch fishing, bluegills, that information would be provided in that as well. Our website also has Michigan fish and how to catch them that can be useful for folks to find where different fish species are. So.
Yeah, we also have a walleye management plan that goes, it identifies all the walleye lakes in the whole state geographically. And regarding that management plan, if online, we have a fisheries library section where you can go and you can download any type of report, management activity, a special report, and get that information in your hands and read about it. It could be about a specific water body, it could be general management plan, and there's a lot of great information on our web.
All right. Frank from Flat Rock wants to know, cormorants appear to be a big problem on the Huron River. What does the DNR do to protect the fish being stocked in this area each year from this species?
Yeah, cormorants are a migrating waterfowl type bird that primarily eat fish. So a lot of anglers are very concerned about cormorant populations, especially since they started to increase recently. Being that they're a migratory bird, they're managed through the federal government. So we don't have, Michigan doesn't have direct control to manage these birds, but we do cooperate with the federal government on them. Last year, the U.S. Department of Agriculture Wildlife Services was able to take up to 15,000 cormorants in the upper part of Michigan. There's also egg oiling that goes on to help control their population. But what Michigan does do is where we stock fish, we have what's called an avian predator notification program where we work with volunteers that we will notify when we're taking fish to a stocking location. So, for example, if we're taking steelhead or brown trout or something like that to the Huron River, we would notify volunteers to meet us there. They would watch over the fish, and if there are seagulls or cormorants present, they would basically harass those birds to keep them away from the fish until the fish became acclimated and swam off. So we do have that program, but it's basically volunteer driven. So we need a lot of help at the local sites to make that happen.
This next one is an important one. What are my rights to fish on a lake or stream in Michigan?
Oh, that's a great question. We get an awful lot of comments, especially this time of year. Trout season is open now. Question comes in, can I wade a stream? Okay, and the answer would be yes, you can. On a navigable body of water, stream, a wading fisherman can wade down that river and fish. If they come to an obstruction, say a deep hole or logs across the stream or whatever, they can get out, go on private property, they can get out and go around the obstruction the quickest and shortest way they can and get back in the water and continue on. Now the question comes in, well, if I'm up on a bank and it's a deep hole, I'm going around, can I fish there? And the answer is no. You can't fish from the bank because that is private property. Of course, if it's public property on one side, you can get out on that side and fish from the bank, or if it's on both sides, you can do that. If it's non-navigable waters, you're going to need the permission of the landowner before you travel down the stream bed. Now, on a lake, as long as the lake has got access to it, you can get on the lake and you can fish the entire surface body of the lake, through a boat launch, or if somebody invites you to, put a canoe or a boat in on their property. We have a lot of lakes in our state that are surrounded totally by private property, and to fish those, you would need somebody's permission that owns property on the lake to be able to give you access to it.
Okay. How do I know what's accurate about potential invasive species in Michigan? Are Asian carp in the Great Lakes?
Well, just to frame this a little bit, Fisheries Division has an aquatic invasive species program where we have about 3 staff right now working on this issue. We've also developed management plans with other departments and agencies. One is our Asian carps management plan, where we specifically are focused on preventing that species entering the Great Lake. We also have plans that would detect those species and then eradicate them if they're here. We also have a larger management plan. It's an aquatic invasive species management plan that we've collaborated with the other agencies in the state, and that looks at all of our invasive species. One of which was talked about earlier, VHS, which is a virus. That's an invasive virus that came in, we think, through ballast water. And it kills fish in close proximity to each other. There's a list online that shows what fish are susceptible and what are not susceptible. So that's something I just wanted to clarify. The current status of Asian carp, there's something that we use to detect them. It's called environmental DNA. We have had some positive environmental DNA hits in Lake Erie. We do have another species, grass carp, that has shown up in Jay's unit in the St. Joe River and a couple other areas. We don't think they've created populations that are reproducing prolifically yet. So we are still very focused on preventing them entering the Great Lakes. If they do enter, hopefully they do not, we do have plans in place that can help us eradicate, detect them.
We've also been getting eDNA samples, water samples from the St. Joe River, which is fairly close to Chicago, where we're hearing a lot about Asian carp, and we haven't had any positive results there. And we'll also be looking at the Grand River, Kalamazoo, and St. Joe again, as well as the Muskegon River, to see if we have any samples that come back positive there.
Yeah, and we have plans all throughout the state, and it is an important thing. We're working very hard on this issue, and we realize it's a big issue for us.
You know, in light of that, also when we talk about the invasive species and that, we're also looking at we touched a little bit earlier on VHS, and we're talking about some disease issues also that we're working on in the state. And one of the things that we're looking at for VHS is clean your boats off and that. But maybe you guys can explain a little bit more. What is VHS?
VHS, viral hemorrhagic septicemia. So, like Nick touched on, it's a virus, and there's multiple paths it could have got here. It can be transferred from fish to fish or in water. So that's why we thought it came in through possibly ballast water. And all the states in the Midwest are trying to prevent the spread of this disease. So basically, the disease or virus makes the fish bleed. And that's one of the ways you can detect it, is you can actually see blood coming out of the scales of the fish, or the eyes get really red. Or when you fillet the fish, you may see red marks in the meat itself, or even in the kidney area. So it's pretty nasty when the fish do get it.
Yeah, and we do have some recorded fish die-offs in Lake St. Clair. Generally, it's happened several times. We have one inland lake, Bud Lake, that it's happened. We had a large fish die off, and we haven't seen it in a while, but it's here, and it could happen any year. We have a large fish die off.
We had a question earlier about Great Lakes muskie and our restoration plans for that, and that was one of the species that was affected in Lake St. Clair. We had quite a large die off of muskies in that lake because of VHS.
And along with that, with VHS and the other diseases that we have is in the invasive species, and that again, if you're moving from body water to body water, we don't want to transfer any plant material, because there could be anything on that plant material from one body water to the other. So it's really important that you clean off your bottom of your hull of your boat, or anything that's hanging on your motor. Wash it off, spray it off. A lot of communities, and even at some of our sites, we have spray off units that you can spray your boats off. So, the anglers can do their part too to help not move things around by taking care of their equipment also.
Yeah, clean, drain, dry. That's a word we like to use, words we like to use.
There you go.
It's a good slogan. Okay. All right. I'm interested in going bow fishing, but how do I make sure I'm doing it legally?
Okay, bow fishing is a really a growing sport. A couple things. Obviously, you need to be licensed for fishing. It is fishing. Bow fishing equipment is considered fishing equipment, so the same regulations apply for the licenses. You're going to want to make sure the species are open, because there are some specific times when you can or you cannot bow fish. And I would encourage you to look into your guide on page 20 and 21. It explains all the regulations and the time frames when you can, partake in that part of the sport. But the question's been coming up recently about, well, can I do it within the city limits, say like here in downtown Lansing? And yes, it is fishing, and yes, bows are considered fishing. However, they are also considered a weapon as far as the discharge of in the city limits. A lot of cities have ordinances against that, not allowing you to target practice with a bow or a firearm. So I know there's a couple groups out there that are looking to try to help encourage cities to open up their boundaries to allow bow fishing. The department supports us moving forward and try and open as much access to bow fishing as possible. So it's a great sport. But a couple of things, remind folks too, is that when you do it, and if you're successful, don't leave the fish on the bank. If you're shooting suckers or carp, don't leave them lay in the water. Don't leave them on the bank. Sure, it's litter and you could be ticketed for that, but more importantly, it's the perspective of what we're doing and what the other public is looking at. And we don't want to show people what that aspect of our sport. We want to make sure that if we harvest the fish, we take it out. Suckers are great smoked, and so are carp if you've done properly. So utilize the resource.
Yeah, and crossbow has become very popular lately, and we recently changed the fishing regulation where we allow crossbows now for bow fishing.
Good point.
We've talked about a lot of fishing regulations today, and I don't know if you actually showed the fishing guide or not, but we keep mentioning this fishing guide. And the bow fishing regulations, the panfish regulations we talked about, there's even sections on VHS in here. So this is worth looking at because just about everything we've talked about is touched on somewhere in here.
A lot of great information in there.
Yeah, and they're available at all your licensed dealers.
That was my next question, actually. Where can I get that fishing guide? Okay. All right. This question we're going to take live from Facebook. What are the regulations for putting brush piles into lakes?
Well, the DNR doesn't have any regulations. We have some recommendations on that. The regulations actually come through the Department of Environmental Quality. It's a Part 301 permit that you have to get to put brush piles or any type of structure permanently in a lake. And you can get those permits through your local Department of Environmental Quality office. Fish division or fish biologists will usually work with the people that are looking to put in structure in their lakes. We want to make sure that structure is actually needed. We prefer to actually have more natural structure like tree falls or trees along the edge of the lake. That's where the minnows are really going to use that type of habitat. If people still want to put out brush piles, we prefer them in deeper water so they're not going to interfere with navigation at all. We don't want boats running into them. And make sure they use natural materials. There's a lot of new products out there that use plastics and almost like plastic Christmas trees. We don't really want to have that type of material in our lakes. We don't want tires or anything like that. So brush piles are usually permittable, as well as wooden cribs, which are made out of logs. So
yeah, a lot of people want to throw their Christmas trees on their ice after Christmas, and you got to get a permit for that.
yeah.
Jay, you make a great point about putting a structure in the water for navigation, because anytime you put anything in the water and it causes a hazard to navigation, you're going to be responsible for that. So if you put a crib in or a big brush pile and you cause damage to somebody's boat or injury, you're going to be responsible. So like Jay said, if you're going to do something like that, get the permit, do it properly, do it in deeper water.
Okay. Good stuff to know. All right. What about stocking my pond with fish? What should I know?
I would first contact your local DNR office and Operations Service Center and ask to talk with a fish biologist. They can really help you out figuring out what your pond needs, whether it actually needs stocking or not. It may not need any stocking. So they can help you with that. They can help you out with species to stock, size of fish to stock, how many to stock. And they can also help determine whether your pond is actually considered a public water body. If it's connected to a lake or stream, it may need a permit, and you can get a permit through that fisheries biologist while you're talking with them. And why we have a permitting system is we don't want people to introduce any fish species that aren't already native or being used for management in Michigan. And we want to make sure that those fish are disease free, so we're not spreading diseases from your pond to waters of the state.
Okay. All right. Now, Michael from Southwest Michigan says, I'm a property owner on a large private lake. Our lake association stocks fish every year. Do I need to possess a fishing license when I fish this lake?
Generally, no, but let me qualify that. If it is a totally private lake and there is no ingress or egress, meaning any water coming in, going out, stream, creek, anything like that, and there's no public access on it, of course, because it's totally private, then the answer would be no, you do not need a fishing license. But one thing they do want to check, and this kind of goes on with what Jay just said about stocking, we want to make sure that that lake has never been stocked at any time by state fisheries. Okay, so if it had been, if it was back in the 40s or the 50s, at any time, state fish were put into that lake, then they would need a license, even though they have their own stocking program and it's totally privately owned. So if they're in doubt, like the guys have said, check with the fisheries division at the district office closest to you, and they'll be able to help you out to answer that question.
Okay. Now on to Nick in Leelanau County. When you measure a fish, do you measure it from its nose to the end of its tail, or from its nose to the middle of the fork in its tail?
Okay, we're gonna give the anglers the benefit of doubt in this. You know, as it is, fishermen kind of have a tendency to stretch it anyhow. So you take it from the tip of the nose of the fish, and then when you can bring your hand down and take the tail and fork it down, squeeze it down, and you go to the very far tip of it. So right from tip to tip. You don't have to take it in the fork. So get the benefit of a nice long tail on a fish.
And add two, right?
Add two.
We call them bump boards, where you have like a special ruler with an end that you can really butt the nose of the fish up to it, and you can pinch the tail down, and it's nice and clear as to how long that fish is.
Okay. All right. I want to fish more in Michigan, but how do I find out the best places to go?
Yeah, that's good. We get that question quite a bit, and we have a ton of information out there. Jay touched on something earlier where each management unit throughout the state has a Better Fishing Waters, where they'll list the lakes or rivers by county and have the types of species that are in there. We also have a lot of instructional articles on the web, and we'll have YouTubes of different things you can do, knots, fishing techniques. We have a weekly fishing report. We also have family-friendly fishing waters. That's a new program that we just started that's really exciting, where there's family-friendly fishing waters. And we have these hot spots and local tips all throughout the year that you can find online. We also have stocking reports. Jay mentioned that earlier, where you can go and you can download. You can search by county, by lake, by species. You can find out what types of fish are stocked there. And then I mentioned earlier the library that we have online. We have a lot of reports on individual lakes, individual water bodies. We also have some really cool maps. So pretty much every water body in the state has a nice map that you can see the contours of the water body. You can see substrate and get some pretty good information on. So there's a lot of information on our website. And
there's also forums out there, Michigan Sportsman's Forums, one where they'll different anglers will post where they've been fishing and how they're catching them. Talk to your neighbors, friends, and if you are willing, go into a bait shop and they'll tell you exactly where to go and how to catch them. So.
Unless you're fishing for brook trout, and hardly anybody tells you where the good brook trout spots are.
Okay, so I'll give that email or that website address. It's www.michigan.gov/DNR, correct? Where they can find all of those maps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, this next question is from Mark. Why is it illegal to use a cast net for catching minnows, but a seine of any length is legal?
So a seine. There's cast nets and seines, but just to clarify, cast nets are currently legal in the Great Lakes and connecting tributaries of the Great Lakes. So they are currently legal. They are illegal inland, and the reason why they're illegal is that Sometimes other fish species, like sport fish species, can be targeted with a cast net and not so well targeted with seine. So we don't allow their use inland for that purpose.
So in a cast net, you actually spot the fish and throw it over the top of them, and then it sinks over the top of them, and then you bring it in. Whereas seine, you're usually doing a loop out into a lake shore or a creek, and you don't always see exactly what you're catching. So.
Okay. All right, the Great Lakes and salmon seem to get a lot of the press. What do you do for the smaller lakes and other species?
Yeah, the Great Lakes seem to get a lot of press. They are an exciting sport fishery that's out there. The fish tend to be large. They're lake trout, they're Chinook salmon, steelhead. So there's a lot of excitement about that. And it was really a successful story for the Great Lakes, bringing in these sport fish, these salmon that helped with some invasive species that were in the lake. So a lot of towns built up around them. Our hatchery systems were actually built. Most of them were built for salmonid type species, trout and salmon. So the perception is that that's the biggest thing out there. But actually for inland waters, we, like I mentioned earlier, most of our work in the field is on inland waters, whether it's an inland trout stream or doing a survey on a smallmouth bass stream to see how things are going. Working on our 11,000 inland lakes. I think there was a creel survey on Houghton Lake, and there was just as much angler effort there on that inland lake as there was in Lake Michigan. So our inland lakes, our inland waters are very important. We spend a lot of time on them, and I think they just don't get the press of the Great Lakes because salmon are more sexy, I guess.
Okay. Is it legal to use a light or lighted fishing device, such as a bobber, when fishing?
Short answer is yes. Actually, it's very popular for using lights for crappies, or folks who use, in the water, submerged below the water, right on the water surface. Lighted bobbers I've seen used. I've also seen some lures that actually will have a glow stick inside of them. So using a lighted source like that, yes, it would be legal.
Okay. What about this? What is DNR doing to get more kids interested in fishing, especially when they're glued to their computers, televisions, and other handheld devices?
Well, we're doing a lot. I think I mentioned a few of those things earlier. We do have a free fishing weekend two times a year, where it's 4 days, where it's free if you're a resident of the state of Michigan to go out and fish. And we do target younger folks with some specific programs at some of our hatcheries and our other operational service centers to educate them on how to fish and get them excited on it. We do have hook, line, and sinker programs at state parks and Recreation 101 throughout the state parks and other recreational areas. Additionally, we have a program called Salmon in the Classroom that's about, 10 years old now. I can't remember, but it's a really neat program. We have it about 180 schools where we bring in eggs to the classroom, and we have a curriculum around that, and students can watch a salmon from an egg to a yolk sack, to a fry, to a fish to be stocked out in the rivers. So it's a pretty neat program, and it's to get kids excited about fish and fishing and protecting the environment. So we do a lot of stuff.
And we just completed a strategic plan called Charting the Course, and we recognize that as a huge issue, getting kids out in the outdoors, enjoying our natural resources, and trying to recruit new anglers is a big part of that. So we'll have committees internally that will be talking about that. And this is our new strategic plan, Charting the Course, with a cool smallmouth bass on the cover. And that's available at some of our operations service centers if you want an actual copy of it. And it's also available online. So.
Okay. Another great reason to visit the website. From Mark in Lake Orion. How are bass boats being allowed to fish Lake Orion in March and April If the bass seasons are stated as such, could they potentially be fishing for other species? How do I protect the fish during these early spawning sessions?
Sure, we have, seasons run year round on certain species that we have, and just because it's a bass boat out there doesn't mean that they are targeting bass. However, if somebody is targeting bass before the season, and they're throwing bass baits and that, then that is illegal. A few years back, we went and started our catch and release early bass season that opens up on the end of April, last Saturday in April, and that's, again, what can I do to help protect the fish? That's an immediate catch and release. But if somebody is targeting fish beforehand, if one of our officers check them and, they've got a big bass plug or jitterbug or whatever on it for a bass lure, and they say, I'm, going after panfish, well, no, you can't target it. But if there are other seasons that are open, and if they're, as long as they're, not targeting, those type of species, then they're good to go.
Yeah, like Dean said, we have a lot of fisheries that are closed for the spawning season. Bass, we do have that catch and immediate release season that's open to them. And we've studied this and we reviewed it quite a bit with university partners and other researchers. And it's shown that there isn't a large effect. The bass do guard their nests, so that is a concern when you take them off their nest, that their eggs and fry could be vulnerable to predators. But we believe the catch and immediate release program works pretty well to protect those fisheries.
Okay. Well, we've got some extra time here for some live questions. I caught a fish that appeared to have something wrong with it, almost as if it was sick. Is that normal?
Well, probably not. There are times there are seasons during the year that there could be natural die-offs, but the key thing is if you do see something not natural or doesn't look normal, there's a couple ways to handle it. You can call the RAP line, the report all poaching line that Dean mentioned earlier, to report that incident. You can contact your local DNR office. You can take a picture. That'd be the best thing. Most folks have a camera right on their phone to take a picture, and they can email that right in to the general fisheries division email, and one of our staff will look at it and help decide if it is not normal. Jay's out in the field a lot, so he probably gets these calls a little more than I do.
Yeah, online we also have a report fish kills where you can get on and report where you saw a fish kill if you're seeing dead fish with the lethargic looking fish. But we want to know about it, so some way contact us, DNR, so we can look into it. It may be a situation where we know a particular lake is prone to having low dissolved oxygen over winter or sometimes during the summer, so that lake may have annual die-offs, but it might be a lake that's typically healthy, and if you're seeing lethargic fish, that can be a sign of a disease, so we'll want to look into it. And especially if you're seeing a lot of fish, more than just one, and all the fish of one species, that's usually an indication that there's a disease going on.
Yeah,
Okay.
VHS has come up several times today, and that's definitely a concern always. So.
Yeah.
All right. And I'll go ahead and give our viewers that email address where they can send those photos in case they do encounter a sick fish. And it is DNR-fisheries@michigan.gov. And I'm sure they can find that on the website as well. All right, we'll take just 2 more questions tonight. Why do fish species like muskellunge and sturgeon have special seasons and regulations?
Well, typically for those specific species, they're low density, so they require more protection. So a lot of times species like sturgeon and muskie, they don't spawn or reproduce till they're older in life, so they need to be protected for that longer period of time. They can also be vulnerable under high harvest scenarios, high exploitation, so it's important to protect those fish. And we do a lot. We have a sturgeon management plan right now and a muskie management plan right now that identifies those populations and different techniques to manage those fish. It's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. So we work hard with those low-density fish. They certainly are managed differently, and they are special. So managed that way.
Lake sturgeon are actually threatened in Michigan, so we're trying to get their populations back, and there's only a few places where you can actually fish for them. Lake St. Clair, Black Lake, and I think Otsego Lake near Gaylord. So there's just really a few places in Michigan you can actually target them and keep them. Otherwise, you got to immediately release them if you happen to catch a sturgeon.
And one of the big changes this year is they got to go to the one harvest tag.
Yep.
For
Yeah, so
muskie.
for both species require a harvest tag. They're slightly different, but muskie, yeah, this year we changed regulations. Thanks, Dean, for mentioning that, where we only allow one fish harvested for the entire season, and in order to do that, you have to have a harvest tag. And we have had some confusion where people think it's a catch and similar to a catch and immediate release scenario. It's not that. It is a harvest tag. If you're going to harvest a muskie, you must have that tag.
Okay. You mentioned seasons, and so does our last question of the evening. Are there certain times of the year when it's better to catch certain fish species?
Certainly, for a couple of reasons. They can be more congregated during certain times of year. So, for example, steelhead are a popular fish. If you don't have a boat and you can't get out in the Great Lakes to fish for them, a great time to fish is in the late fall, winter, and early spring when they're making migrations up the rivers that are more vulnerable. So you'll want to target fish when they're concentrated in areas if you can. Typically, it's when they are spawning. Another time I've heard if you like to eat fish, for example, black crappie are better to be caught and eaten when it's winter or early spring. When it warms up, their meat tends to get a little more soft. So that's another reason to fish for those in the colder months. So.
Yeah, and trout, it's a lot of it's temperature related, so different trout species will be active during different times of the year, and whether there's invertebrate hatches going on, mayflies and other animals that are hatching, insects that are hatching, they'll be more active or less active and change your tactics. So,
All right. Our hour has come to a close, so it's time to wrap up DNR Live Fish. Thank you, Dean, Jay, and Nick, for your time and insight into fishing in our great state. And thank you to you, the viewers, for joining us and providing such outstanding questions. If you didn't get the answer that you needed, look for it on Facebook at www.facebook.com/MIDNR in the next few days. We'll be posting follow-up information and resources, as well as a video of tonight's chat. Leave us your comments on tonight's event and offer suggestions for our next topic. And don't forget to visit www.michigan.gov/fishing. Have a wonderful night.